Well, we begin in Liberia, where the country's Supreme Court has suspended next week's presidential runoff, at least for now. It's considering claims of fraud stemming from third-placed candidate Charles Brumskine. His Liberal Party and the Electoral Commission have until Thursday to file briefs with the court. Neither of the frontrunners, former football star George Weah and current Vice President Joseph Boakai, were able to secure an outright majority in the first round. After 2 terms in office, Africa's first female president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, did not contest the vote. But the ruling party is accusing her of interfering in the October 10th elections. Authorities are calling for calm following the Supreme Court's ruling and are urging the public not to panic. Well, let's get you more on that story now. I'm joined live from Lagos by CGTN's Deji Badmus. Deji, what is the significance of the Liberian Supreme Court's decision?
Well, Mahir, what is going to happen is that, well, as the court has actually asked that the opposition party now, I'm talking about the candidate of the Liberty Party now, the candidate who actually came third in the first round of the election, to file their case by latest Thursday. And so the Electoral Commission too will be expected to file its case. What is going to happen is that, well, there's every likelihood that the runoff election scheduled for next week may not be taking place. But then you never can tell. I mean, the Supreme Court might just give its ruling on Thursday or Friday and probably ask that the runoff election should go ahead. But there is a chance that the runoff election might be shifted to give the Supreme Court the time now to be able to look properly into this matter. And of course, as you know, the Electoral Commission, since has been asked to suspend preparation for the runoff election, it just might need some time. So there's a likelihood that the election might be shifted, but there's also the possibility that the Supreme Court might just rule on this by Thursday, and you know, the runoff election takes place on Tuesday as scheduled.
And Deji, talking about the future, what can you tell us about what happens next if indeed it is shifted? When can we expect the runoff to take place?
Well, if the election is shifted, of course, the election, I mean, if there's no judgment, if the Supreme Court does not decide by Thursday, there's every likelihood that the election will be shifted. But we have to wait for the judgment of the Supreme Court to come. We can't preempt it. What I think is going to happen is that the Supreme Court will have to look at the allegations of irregularities now by the opposition candidate. This time we're talking about Mr. Charles Brumskine now of the Liberty Party. Eventually, if of course the Supreme Court accepts the argument of the Liberty Party's candidate, it definitely means we might have you know, a complete rerun of the entire process with all the candidates taking part. But of course, if that fails, then the runoff election will go ahead with the 2 candidates. I'm talking about George Weah of the CDC and, of course, Vice President Boakai of the ruling Unity Party.
And Deji, finally, speaking about last month's vote, what are some of the grievances that have been brought before the court over the first round of voting?
Well, Mr. Charles Brumskine now alleged that there was massive irregularities. For instance, in one case, he said polling did not start on time, that a lot of people were not allowed to vote because polling began very late, and that in some cases, polling actually closed very late, and that when polling had officially closed, that the NEC, that's the Electoral Commission now, officials allowed people to continue to vote in certain areas. He's also alleging that in some cases, electoral officials actually broke open the ballot box, and that in some cases there were attempts to snatch ballot boxes. So quite a lot of allegations. But of course, I must add that the international observers, those who actually observed the election, have said that, well, they didn't find anything wrong with the election, that for them the election went all too smoothly. But, you know, we never can tell. As we saw in Kenya, we just have to wait to hear from the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court actually believes or goes with those allegations, we just have to wait and see. But one thing we're certain is this. if the Supreme Court buys those allegations, it definitely means there will be a complete, it means the election will have to take place again with all the candidates taking part. But we just have to wait and see what happens. But those are the allegations now made by Charles Brumskine now of the Liberty Party. And by the way, Charles Brumskine actually came third in the election. And some people have actually said, well, even if the Supreme Court asked that the election be conducted all over again, that it just wouldn't change anything at all, that he's not a very strong candidate. But we just have to wait and see how the case in the Supreme Court plays out.
All right, Deji, thank you very much for speaking to us here on Africa Live. CGTN's Deji Badmus joining us there from Lagos, Nigeria.